Yeah, the last minute stuff sometimes works out the best.
Yeah.
Well, I'll jump right into it then, if you're all right.
Yeah. Cool.
This is Hannibal here from the HannibalTV.com, and I'm with legendary NWA wrestler Magnum TA. How are you doing today, sir?
I am doing great. I am so looking forward to this year winding down and looking forward to the holidays. And I couldn't be any better.
Well, I'll jump right into it. I know you were an athlete growing up. How did you end up becoming a professional wrestler?
Well, I was going to college wrestling in collegiate world, and this was back in 1979. And about the time I had these great aspirations of being an Olympic wrestler. Dan Gable was my hero growing up, and that was the same year that something going on in the world of the U.S. was boycotted the Olympics. So the moon and stars weren't lining up well in that aspect, and I was working security while I was going to college in bars in Virginia Beach, one called Rogues and one called Peabody's, and several of the wrestlers were coming into the club where I was working, and I started talking to them, and the light bulb started going off. I started seeing the opportunity of what a profitable living somebody could make in that endeavor. And so I just started changing my mindset and seeing what I need to do to continue expanding my physical capabilities and then taking a shot at making it in the big leagues.
As far as your training for professional wrestling, who trained you and how difficult was the training in those days?
So that's interesting. So I had no like wrestling school or formal wrestling training like so many have those stories. I came to be friends with a fellow named Buzz Sawyer, and everybody's probably very familiar with the Mad Dog Buzz Sawyer, and he was wrestling tag teaming with Matt Bourne in the Mid Atlantic area where I'm kind of from. I grew up in Chesapeake, Virginia, and Buzz, uh, long story that I really don't even want to delve into out of respect for the past and the deceased. But Buzz ended up being the guy to break me in. But my training consisted of 2 hours in the ring in up in Portland, Oregon, at Don Owens territory with Buzz and Princess Victoria, who was from the Pacific Northwest. And we worked out in the ring for about 2 hours. Buzz showed me how to hit the ropes, grab a headlock, take a tackle, do an arm drag, do a couple moves. And then the very next day, I wrestled Buzz on live television for Don Owens. Unbeknownst to me, Buzz had told Don that I had been working for 6 months down in Louisiana for Bill Watts, which I had been down in Louisiana, but I hadn't been wrestling. I hadn't been in a wrestling ring yet. And Don never checked it out. And so I had one day of training, and then I was booked 7 days a week from then on out, and learned everything I learned about the wrestling business live in the ring, working up and down the road.
So I guess that first match against Buzz, you would have done mostly amateur wrestling stuff to not expose you too much.
Actually, we did the headlocks and the tackles and the hip tosses and all the little spots that he'd showed me the day before. And then after that, it was tough because I didn't even know the jargon and the lingo. Somebody said one tackle, drop down, get it again. I didn't even I couldn't process all that. But to put it in perspective for you, the Barbarian was breaking in at the same time and was in that territory, and he was just as green as I was. And I had lots of matches with him and guys like Lord Alfred Hayes and Matt Bourne was there, and just a plethora of talent. And I just absorbed everything I could like a sponge to try to learn and try to get the grasp of what was going on. And I was in a crash course of learning for 6 months in that territory.
It's amazing that the Barbarian is still wrestling today and still looks fairly similar to how he looked back then.
Well, it's his great Samoan genetics is what it is. And he was a beast when I met him, and he's still a beast today at 60 years old. So, yeah, it's a testament to what they turn out there on that island.
Did you ever see him in action in one of his bar altercations after he got some alcohol in him?
No, I was I heard the stories. I was with Dusty when they had to send his mama send the wife out to California to pick him up after one of his escapades out on the West Coast. But I was fortunate enough never to see the Barbarian really in his full glory in alcohol induced mayhem, so to speak.
I haven't heard too much bad about Don Owens' territory up in Portland. How was your experience overall there, and what was your most memorable feud up there?
Well, to be honest, I really was doing nothing but working, at the bottom of the card. Playboy Buddy Rose was there, and Jay Youngblood was in the territory, and it's really kind of a vague remembrance because I was so green what I was doing. I mean, I would go to Jesse Bar when in his towns and help him set the ring up. I would do anything that it took to get experience. Some nights I'd work the first match with somebody and do a 15-minute babyface Broadway, and then go put a referee shirt on and referee 2 or 3 matches. So I was doing everything I could to learn every aspect I could in this crash course, about the business because again I hadn't had 2 weeks of training prior to this, much less what a lot of people went through, and it was absolutely miraculous that I was able to do what I did and not kill somebody in the process. One of my stories, Gene Kaninsky, former world heavyweight champion, and I worked in Seattle, and Gene picks me up, drops me behind him, and tells me to roll him up. And I don't know what a roll up is, and I belly to back suplexed him on his head because I just had to think of something to do. And he was such a big, rough, tough, rugged guy. He just laughed about it afterwards. He didn't have any idea how green I was. But I mean, those were the kind of things that I did over that 6 month period of time. But again, it was 7 days a week. So I came out of there with, 180 matches under my belt that in today's time would be more than, most people get to work in a year. So it was baptism by fire, but nonetheless, Don was a fair man. The payoffs were fair. And, I can't say enough good things about him. I got to see Don back at the NWA convention later on in my career when I made it to the top, and I can't say enough good things about the man.
I understand that it was Andre the Giant that gave you the Magnum TA name. How did that come about?
So when I was in Portland and working there, breaking in, Andre came to town. Well, whoever had the biggest car drove Andre around, and I had this big Olds 98 4-door monster car that he could fit in. So we drove around, got to know each other, kind of formed a friendship, my first, 2 months in the business. And then fast forward to 1982, broke in 80, started in 80, 1982, 82 and a half, I'm in championship wrestling in Florida. Andre comes in. Now I'm a little seasoned. I've been, I've had a lot of ring time, a lot of matches, and I'm starting to be somebody it's hard not to notice. And so Andre says to me over breakfast one morning, he said, "You look very similar characteristics to that Magnum PI guy on that television series." He said, "You need a name that people can remember, something they can associate with." He said, "You should be Magnum TA." So he was working for Vince Sr. at the time. He was getting ready to go back up to New York, and he was going to pitch the idea to Vince and bring me to New York as Magnum TA. But before that could happen, Paul Orndorff made the jump from Mid South to go to New York, and Ernie Ladd was booking for Bill. He gives me a call in the middle of the night, says, "Hey, there's a spot open here on top. If you want it, it's yours." And so I ran with it. Went to work for Bill, and that's where I took on the Magnum TA name.
How was that territory for you? I understand the money was good and the travel was very hard and the matches themselves were very hard hitting.
Bill came from the Eddie Graham, school of, psychology and wrestling and credibility. And so, he wanted everything to be as hard hitting, as solid, as believable, as attuned to a wrestling contest as it could be depicted. And he was very, very much had that ingrained in his DNA, and anybody that spent any serious amount of time with him, rubbed off on. I mean, Bill's the one that taught me how to throw a punch. Up into that part of my career, I'd only like front forearms and whatnot, and he taught me how to throw a punch. It was like a Bill Watts punch. It was stiff. It looked good, but it was stiff. There's no way you could see through it. And I learned a lot. I call my time at Mid South my graduate school work of my career, because it was the first opportunity to work on top and to do main event angles and get a lot of mic time and get to do the kinds of things you have to do to be a main eventer and to take on the responsibility of helping to draw big main event money. And it was under his tutelage and Bill Dundee, who came in as the booker, that I learned what it takes to be a big money ball player, in our industry.
Who were some of the wrestlers you feuded with while you were in that territory?
So when I started out, they tagged right off the bat. They tagged Jim Duggan and I together, and we had countless tag team matches with like Ted DiBiase and goodness, I can't even think of all the names right now. Jim the Anvil Neidhart was there, and we had the tag team thing that was just kind of a traditional wrestling type feuds, and I went round and round with Hacksaw Butch Reed. He was the North American Heavyweight Champion, chasing him for that championship. But when Bill Dundee came in, he's the one that helped pop the territory and take this cast of characters, this young Magnum TA, and turn that into a feud with Mr. Wrestling 2, and bring in the Midnight Express. So we put heat on them to the moon and set them up to have a tremendous run with the Rock and Roll Express. Again, Ted DiBiase was there. Steve Dr. Death Williams was there. Barry Darso, Rick Rude. I mean, there was just talent so deep in the territory. And every night, we had hard hitting, believable, wrestling contests, and they were selling out all their venues at the time. For the last year I was there, I mean, a small venue like Houma, Louisiana, or Lafayette, and we were averaging $20,000 a night in those buildings, and the territory was on fire. Bill, I'm sure that was his the heyday of his run as a promoter in that Mid South.
I know you were usually a baby face, but I understand there was a lot of fan attack incidents in that territory. Were you ever in the ring when either a riot occurred or you witnessed a scary situation with a heel?
No, I never did. I heard those stories, and I know they're true, because I mean, JYD, told me countless stories like that. I've seen the kind of heat that could have erupted into that. I was in New Orleans the night that Wrestling 2 turned heel on Dog and screwed him out of the North American Heavyweight title that Dog was holding at the time, and so I see how serious they could be. I mean, I heard the story of guys pulling knives on guys and cutting them, going to and from, and having rides where the police had to barricade the doors to keep the fans from getting back there to get to the heels. They were very serious about their wrestling, and when you mix that Cajun flavor to those kind of fans, like in Baton Rouge and some of those towns down there along the coast, you had a real recipe for something volatile if you didn't give them what they wanted.
And as far as the Florida territory, you mentioned earlier, Eddie Graham was a genius as far as booking. How was your experience working down there, and who were some of the bookers at the time? Because I know Eddie often had Mike, Dusty, and Kevin Sullivan helping out.
So I was working for Joe Blanchard in San Antonio. Mike Graham comes in as the junior world's heavyweight champion for a guest spot, and him and I hit it off and have this like immediate bond. And again, I've been in the business like 1 year at this point. Mike goes home, tells his dad about me, gives me a call, said, "We want you to come to Florida." I go to Tampa, and I get there. Dory Funk Jr. was the booker, and Territory was doing so-so, but I got to travel with Eddie and Mike every day for the first 6 months. And I stood in the back with Eddie watching the matches and him telling me what was good, what wasn't good, taught me the difference in selling, registering, dying, what a babyface needed to do, all the things you need to do to establish yourself and tell a story in the wrestling profession. So with somebody like that in your ear every night is just the value of that you can't even put a number on. And 6 months into that journey, Dory leaves, and in comes this charismatic guy that I've never met before in my life, American Dream Dusty Rhodes. Dusty and I had never met. We make a couple of road trips together, and next thing you know, we're like tied at the hip. And Dusty then gives me a whole different education. Now all of a sudden, besides just the scientific and hard hitting and all the things that Eddie, preached and talked about in angles and those kind of things, I got this very charismatic view of somebody else with, different types of psychology. And it was, magical to see the things Dusty could do to manipulate a crowd and just all those kind of things. So on the heel side, yes, we had Kevin Sullivan, we had Angela Mosca, we had Mark Lewin, and Bobby Duncan, all these guys that were just incredible. Jake the Snake Roberts, and I got to work with all these guys, and I got to get a lot of ring time because Dusty gave me the opportunity, but knew I needed polish and ring time and work. Tagged me up with Brad Armstrong and with Scott McGee, and we were tag team champions. But we'd go out there and wrestle 30 minutes every night with whoever the challenger was. So I was getting a crash course in psychology and learning, how important the interviews were, tapping into your charisma, learning how to relate to the audience on a different level. And again, it was a priceless education and experience I was getting in such a short period of time that some people would have taken 10 years to get to experience the things I got in the first 2.
You mentioned you worked for Joe Blanchard. There's a lot of Texas wrestling fans on this channel. I was wondering if you could share some of your memories of wrestling in Texas.
Well, I loved it out there. I love the culture. I love the food. I loved everything about it, except for the fact that I was just an underneath guy trying to learn my way, trying to learn the craft, trying to figure it all out. One of my big takeaways from that point in my career, I've been in the business 6 months, and so I'm modeling myself out of people that I can somehow relate to. And I was watching the Road Warriors and what they were doing, and I just thought that was so cool. So like they were this bigger than life, freaks of nature. And Ray Hernandez had just come into the territory, and brought with him a grocery bag about yay tall, full of performance enhancing vitamins, you might say, and from Florida. And him and I start working out together, training together, and I'm determined I'm going to be 300 pounds. And I got up to about 270 in about 2 months of working out with Ray from 230 where I started. And I walk into this dressing room one night, and Bruiser Brody was in town, and he looks at me and said, "Kid, you're looking great." He said, "You look like $1,000,000." He said, "But I want to give you a little bit of advice. If you want to make it big in this business, don't do it just based on what you look like and something that you can't maintain year round. Learn your craft, learn the skill sets, learn the mic work, and find a place physically that you can maintain 12 months out of the year and be healthy." And a light bulb went off because I realized I was like gaining weight. I was turning myself into a monster, yet I could tell it was pulling down my cardiovascular wasn't as good. My endurance wasn't as good. And I said, I'm going to find a happy medium somewhere where I can find the good shape for myself, but try to be the best skill set that I can possibly be. Because even from the day one, I had this goal in my mind that I one day wanted to be the best. I wanted to be a world champion and recognized for my in the ring work. And Brody turned my whole ship around while I was there, and I never looked back. I shied away from the performance enhancing drugs. I shied away from anything other than being best technician and student of the game that I can be.
So some people talk about Bruiser Brody as if he was a bully and out for himself, but in your experience, he was actually helpful to you as a green wrestler.
He, knowingly or unknowingly, had one of the most dramatic effects on me anybody can have. And then later on, when I went from working for Joe to Florida Championship Wrestling, he and Stan came in, and I didn't know anything about their reputations or them being rough with people in the ring because I worked pretty snug, and I thought that's the way you were supposed to work from the beginning. That's just the way I worked. So when they came to Florida, they had the battle royals going all around the loop, and it's so funny. Stan and Bruiser both would only they'd let me throw them out of the ring, and they didn't want anybody else to touch them. They didn't even want to deal with anybody else. So they were like somehow took some liking to me early on, and I never had one bad experience with either one of those guys.
You mentioned about your size at one point getting close to 300. The fans on here always like to know your best ever squat, bench press, and deadlift.
So I didn't max when I was at my biggest. When I was in my best shape at 240, I could do reps with 405 on the bench. I could incline 405. I could do seated militaries with 275. I had a lot of shoulder and back strength, and I had a lot of lower back strength when I was 167 pounds in high school wrestling. I could deadlift 450, and I have to think that at 240, I probably could deadlift quite a bit because that's where the belly to belly came from. I realized early on in my career that if I can waist lock anybody, if I could get my hands around them, I could suplex them whether they wanted to go or didn't want to go. And that's where the belly to belly suplex ended up being my finish because I realized early on, if you ever got the chance to be a star and work on top, you had to have a finish that you could do to a seasoned veteran, with him working with you, or some underneath green guy that maybe, didn't know a wristwatch from a wrist lock. And so I had some pretty serious back and upper body strength that was all geared towards keeping me strong because I wasn't trying to be a bodybuilder, but I did want to be strong and be able to handle myself in the ring and to move bodies around and do the things that we had to do to portray the contest that we did.
When would have been the first time you met Ric Flair?
I met Ric Flair for the first time on Mike Graham's boat in Tampa, Florida. Uh, he came in to the territory. He was a champion. He was dating Beth then. They weren't even married yet, and we all went out boating out in the Tampa Bay on Mike's offshore race boat, and spent the day. And so we met back then. We never were. We weren't in the ring together, anything like that. My first in the ring meeting with him was when I was the North American champion for Bill, and we wrestled. I believe it was Tulsa, Oklahoma, and that match and that timing, I think, was some of the precursors to me coming to work for the Crockett's.
As far as his daughter Charlotte, have you seen much of her?
I've known Charlotte since she was 3 years old, and every time I've seen her, I saw her as a teenager and as a college student, at her mom and dad's house here in Charlotte, at Christmas parties and things, and talked to her, and I've seen her on a handful of occasions since she broke into the business. The last time I really got to spend a significant amount of time with her was at her brother's funeral, which obviously was, terribly, sad, traumatic time. But I followed her and stayed in touch with her, and so proud of the career that she's had for herself so far, and I'm sure the best of her is still yet to come. I mean, she's been off this last year, rehabbing from some surgeries. I think she's going to definitely make a mark that'll be maybe not that of which her father did, because that's just a hard mark to follow, but certainly as an athlete and a performer, she's second to none.
The dream match for a lot of wrestling fans would be Charlotte versus your stepdaughter Tessa. Do you think there's a chance of that ever happening in WWE?
I think there's always a chance of something of that magnitude happening, because they're business people, and Tessa has got got a special, unique charisma about her that gives her that it factor, and she's been out of the mainstream with the virus stuff shutting the world down and everything for the last 8-9 months, but she's also been training like an absolute beast, where she's living down in Tijuana, Mexico, in CrossFit training, and still working out in the ring. But she's absolutely the best physical shape of her life, and only getting in better physical shape. So she's 25 years old. I've got to think sometime in the next 12 to 18 months, we see that being a possible reality.
I know you had a hand in her training. What aspects of her training did you help her with when she was learning the ropes?
Well, to be honest, she trained with George South here in Charlotte for months before she ever let either myself or her dad, Tully, know what she was doing. She like most young kids and teenagers, went through her little wild child, spree in her late teens, and and kind of found her way to the wrestling door of George to try that out, because she'd gone to the Hall of Fame ceremony with her dad when he was inducted, and I think the seed was kind of planted in the back of her brain then. But after she worked out for a while, I went and watched her work. I watched her in the ring, and I told her then, I said, you're really not that good yet. I said, but you have that it factor that you can't buy and you can't learn. You got that thing that's undeniable. And I said, so what you've got to do is just work harder than anybody around you, and get to the highest level your physical game can be each and every day, so that you can capitalize on that. Because it takes time to learn what to do with that thing. And especially in today's time where they can't go up and down the road and wrestle 7 days a week like we did back in, the days when we were coming into business. And they've got a social media tool in their belt that they're able to capitalize on and other things. But still, when push comes down to shove, when the bell rings, you've got to be able to perform bell time to meet the hype. And she has really brought her skill sets up amazing over the really short number of years that she's been in the business. I mean, it's 5 years technically, but if you put all that in a bucket, it wouldn't amount to what we used to be able to do in 1 year. But she's doing some great things, and I think Tessa has got a lot to offer, and I think she's going to make some noise.
Without getting into it too much, there was some controversy when they made her the men's champion of Impact Wrestling. Then, from what I understand, it had something to do with the coronavirus, why she didn't come back and drop the title before her contract. And
well,
side to it, because she hasn't really spoke about it. We've only ever heard Impact's side of it, and they've been known to spin the truth in some other cases. So I was just wondering.
Well, I knew from the moment they came up with the idea of making her this intergender, now the world's heavyweight champion, that they were going down a dangerous path. And they came to our home here in Charlotte and filmed a special with her mom and I about it. And I support Tessa because she's my stepdaughter, but I'm not a big fan of that portrayal of men and women in the ring. Not because women aren't capable or anything else. It's just I don't ever like anything that depicts a man being physically violent with a woman. I mean, I've got a young daughter that's 13 years old, and whether today they know it's all a work or not, is still not a portrayal that I'm real comfortable with. So I told her that I knew that she'd reached the pinnacle of what she could do with that organization. Of course, we didn't know this virus was going to come along, and the fact of the matter is they had wanted her to extend her contract and do different things, and the opportunity that experience with Impact afforded her was a step in her growth in what she was doing. But she needed to move on from that. So because she hadn't extended that contract, they were paying her, peanuts for one thing. But on top of that, she had met all the contractual dates that she needed to meet. So all I told her was, hey, we want you to work one more shot. I offered her up the psychology. I said, take whatever their top paid guy is and figure out what that would equate to in 1 month's salary, and say, hey, if you want me to come in and do this, since I've met my contractual obligation, this is what it would take for me to come do it. And it wasn't a ridiculous amount of money as was rumored on the internet. It was just, hey, this, if we're going to extend it for the equivalent of what you're paying your top guy. And they didn't want to do it. And that's really the truth.
So in other words, they put themselves in that situation.
Over money. Yeah.
Now, as far as going to the Crockett Territory, how did that whole situation come about? We know you were friends with Dusty and Flair. I assume they had some pull there at that time.
They did, and Dusty and I were more than business friends. We were like he was like a brother I never had. And Dusty had gone to the Crockett's, and I was working on top for Bill, and our territory was on fire. And so when Dusty left Florida to go, take the book of Crockett's, he takes Barry Windham with him to be, Joe Namath, be the star, be the name to the brand to lead the company. And the territory was on its rear end. I mean, top guys were making $500-600 a week, and you can't run up and down the road 7 days a week and only make $500-600 and pay your bills and your expenses and everything. It just, the math doesn't work. So Barry was very, very businessman minded in his head, but his friendship with Dusty put him in a awkward position, I guess. And rather than just say, "Hey, I need to work a notice and leave," evidently Barry just up and left kind of unceremoniously with everybody with no plan B. So Dusty and Jimmy Crockett called me in the middle of the night one night while I'm there in Louisiana, and says, "Hey, this is what's happened. I know you're on top. I know you're in a six-figure position, and we can't." And Jimmy got on the phone with me, said, "I can't guarantee you six figures, but what I can guarantee you that if you come here, we will put our whole force behind you and push you like you've never been pushed, and give you the opportunity to be the biggest star that we've ever had." And because I believed in Dusty, and it was a chance to come back full circle, because I'm from Virginia, it'd be an opportunity to wrestle in front of my family and all the people that I'd grown up with, and have an opportunity to be on top and utilize the skills that I've culminated over the last 5 years, and get that chance to really be the world's heavyweight champion like I'd always endeavored to be.
And one of the first people you feuded with there, from what I understand, was Wahoo McDaniel, who is quite an interesting character. What was it like being in the ring with him? I heard he was very hard hitting, to say the least.
He was right down my alley, because here I've just come from a year and a half with Bill Watts, who, if you don't lay it in, or if you do anything that you can remotely see through, he'll either find you or fire you or just blackball you, something, because he is so, intense of a guy. So, I mean, I'm pretty rough, rugged, babyface guy. And I work solid, and I'm, not afraid to, I would take as good as I gave. And so, yeah, I laid it in pretty good too. So when Wahoo would hit me with those big, meat cleaver chops is, and all those kind of things, I was right at home. And it to me, uh, growing up watching Mid Atlantic Championship Wrestling, I'd watched him and Johnny Valentine feud over the big bowl of silver dollars, the goldfish bowl full of silver dollars, and beat each other to death. So it was like an honor for me to step in with this guy that to me was legend. And when he eventually passed the U.S. title to me in a cage match in a sold out Charlotte Coliseum, which was his home base, and puts me over right in the middle, 1, 2, 3, with a belly to belly suplex, no slip on a banana peel, no out, no nothing, nothing but respect for that man. I mean, I've told that story 100 times if I've told it once. The greatest single victory in having my hand raised in front of a sold out crowd was that night with Wahoo.
And I understand from talking to Kamala before he passed, the match that you had with him at the Great American Bash, I guess he didn't want to lose because there was no future for him in the territory, and they wanted to put you over, obviously, because of the big push. Were you experiencing any of that, those problems with the booking backstage before that match, or did you just go in there and wrestle and get the finish like it was just a regular match?
Yeah, to me, it really was irrelevant. The finish, I learned from Bill and from Eddie Graham. I could get myself over whether I had my hand raised or I didn't have my hand raised, whatever. The story I told during the match is what made me believable to the people, made the people want to be behind me. So whether I got a clean win on somebody or whatever, it was the contest that we portrayed and how the battle played out, which was kept my fan base growing. I remember. So yeah, I remember the deal, and Kamal was going to go to New York, I think, and so he didn't want to do the favor right in the middle of the ring. But we gave the fans the pop. We got a DQ, but then I throw them in the ropes and belly to belly them, and the whole 16,000 people are chanting 1, 2, 3. So we gave them the pop. We gave them everything they wanted. The win with a suplex was really irrelevant. The only other guy that there was ever an issue with was Bill Eadie, because he was a mass superstar and a big star here in Mid Atlantic, and he'd come in to work a shot or do something, and Dusty wanted him to do the favor, and he didn't want to, because he felt like he still had potential to come back, maybe at some point in time, and didn't want to, and thought it would somehow be a disservice to him or whatever. And it didn't hurt my feelings any. I mean, probably pissed Dusty off, or maybe Jimmy, but and we worked some DQ or something. But I mean, I was in the ring with the best of them. And before I got my push, I put over everybody and anybody on the planet. And when I left Bill in Mid South, and when I'd been on top, I gave my notice and worked for 6 weeks, a 6 week notice, not a 2 day, not a 2 week. I worked 6 weeks and did the favor for every single person in that territory that had been putting me over for the last year and a half. I mean, that's just the way we did business back then. I mean, it was a work, and we would never, none have got over without each other contributing.
How important was kayfabe back in those days? I know Bill Watts was very strict on it. I'm not sure how strict Crockett was, but I'm sure he was fairly strict as well.
Well, Bill, hands down. I mean, no heels and baby faces were, on the same side of the building dressing, never traveling together, never allowed to, be out in public together. That just, that wasn't tolerated. In Crockett's, it was the same way, but it was such a bigger machine. At our peak, we had 200 people working for the Crockett's, all living in Charlotte. So, like Flair was like back and forth between a baby face and a heel. So he could kind of associate back and forth. But like Tully and I, or Arn and I, Nikita and I, we were all always on the polar opposites of any type of outside to the public's eye situation, always. And yeah, kayfabe was big, to the point where they wanted to shoot angles where we actually ended up getting arrested from fighting in public and stuff like that, just to further an angle. So yeah, it was pretty seriously held as the holy grail of how to protect the business. Even the mid '80s.
I heard that they did some angles too with like Ricky Morton and Ricky Steamboat, where they'd sandpaper someone's face just so when they're walking around, they would look like they were legitimately beat up. Did they ever do that to you?
Oh no, they didn't do it to me. I did it to myself, because I'm just such a you can't tell me anything I can't do, and hardcore guy. We did the angle where the Andersons had jumped me, had done something, and were supposed to have like plowed my head across the carpet. And I took a towel and friction burned the whole side of my face like in a big half moon. And it looked horrible, absolutely horrible. And on top of that, it hurt worse than anything afterwards. Not when I did it, but afterwards, I've never had such pain from anything in my life. It just was like somebody had taken a blowtorch to my face, and I did it to myself. So yeah, I can relate to it.
And you worked a lot of the territories where there was said to be a lot of groupies back in those days. I don't know if you were married when you were on top in those days, but how was it compared to now, where you don't see as much of the screaming girls everywhere?
There was I didn't know so many women existed. To be frank, I mean, it was if there had been cell phones in the '80s, we would have all either been divorced, shot, or locked up. It was just absolute insanity. We were in a different town every day. We were flying on jet planes that we the company owned, and we still weren't coming back. We were just hopscotching all over the country on planes, and I mean there was women in every port throwing themselves at you everywhere you went, 7 days a week, sometimes 3-4 times a day.
What do you think it would take to bring wrestling back to that? Because it just doesn't seem like it's like that anymore.
You can't. You're never going to. I mean, first of all, everything evolves. It changes. It's just like watching. I grew up watching John Wayne and Clint Eastwood, westerns that mesmerized me back in the day. I probably couldn't get my 13-year-old son to sit and watch 15 minutes of any of those programs because it's a different culture. It's a different time. To create the insanity that we were able to create and the emotion from fans and women and old people, young people, everything, the kayfabe part of it and the illusion that we were able to create and make people, question the entertainment they were seeing. They thought they were seeing, something that they were living vicariously through. And it was this, live in the round soap opera that we were portraying every night. And the emotional investment was so high because of that. When it all just became entertainment and like watching a movie or watching a sitcom where it's not real, it took that magic away. And I don't, today there's probably some of the greatest athletes I've ever seen doing things that are, unthinkable, but they're so unrealistic that, they don't have the effect. When you watch Brock Lesnar, suplex, somebody 15 times and yet nothing, but yet they won't get up and walk out. And this is a guy that's legitimately one of the biggest badasses on the planet. I think to myself, well, if I'm watching this and I see this guy 30 years ago that when he hit this move, nobody got up. I'm thinking, well, that big bad looking guy must not know how to do it right. So the effectiveness and the result of doing all these high flying maneuvers and all these spectacular stuntman looking things, if they can't bust a wet paper bag in somebody's imagination of, they could have really just killed somebody, then you lose something. And it just becomes like what we used to joke about Japanese style wrestling or lucha style wrestling, that it's just a bunch of, high spot, high spot, high spot, high spot that doesn't mean anything. That's what it evolved into. Only bigger guys doing it, Mick Foley jumping off the top of a steel cage, or, guys doing moonsaults off of, 20-foot tall cages and all these things. But they high spotted the business to death, just like we used to say somebody came in and hot shotted the territory and then left. So they did all this crazy crap, then they left the territory to try to pick up the pieces. Well, they did that on a global standpoint today. And so now trying to convince somebody that, they should appreciate the athleticism that this is taking to portray, when they say, oh, it's scripted and, oh, they know every move they're going to do before they step in the ring, that makes it kind of a hard sell.
Now, one of the greatest wrestling feuds of all time that people still talk about today, all these decades later, is you versus Tully Blanchard. Could you discuss that feud that, of course, Baby Doll also was involved with?
Sure. And from the time I met Tully, I was green. I was 6 months in the business. And Tully says to me that he wants to be the best heel in the country. That's his goal. That's what he's aspiring to be, the greatest heel. He didn't ever have any desire to be a babyface. He wasn't looking for the glory. He wanted to be the hardest worker, the most in shape, to get the most heat, and to be able to and do it better than anybody else. And when he and I hooked back up when I came to the Mid-Atlantic, now my skill set had come up to a different level. And my intensity and my goal as a babyface was just as intense as his is a heel. So when you combine those two work ethics, and neither one trying to step on the other, neither one really wanting to be in the other one's role, then you've got this combination that's really, really hard to beat. So Tully and I worked an 8-month program to get to the culmination of that I Quit match. And of course, I don't even think you could work an 8-month program, or you can't hardly work an 8-minute program, much less an 8-month program. But we took that battle and all the back and forth things that led up to that match, all around the United States for 8 months prior to, having the blow off match in the I Quit match. And at the time we did it, we didn't even think about the significance of it, because we had done that same kind of thing short of the chair and the eye. We had done that and more in places where it wasn't televised. So when it finally gets captured on film, and with all the intensity that led up to it, it was like we made a classic and we didn't even realize it.
How did you two get along outside the ring? Because I was there when you got your Dan Gable Hall of Fame induction a few years ago, and it seemed like you two are still pretty close friends.
Well, so I'm married to his ex-wife. I raised four of his children that were 1, 4, 5, and 7 when Cordy and I got together, and we've got a professional respect for each other that goes without saying. But time and life and things that ensue and that we've shared vicariously because of this blended family have taken our relationship to a level that a lot of people would have a hard time understanding. But he's still a consummate professional. He's been a great parent in his kid's life, and has a completely different relationship with them today than obviously he was able to have when they were young and the family was broken up. But we still talk, and we do these before the COVID thing, we've done I don't know how many get-togethers and one-on-ones talking about our feud, and it's like we've been tied together with this needle and thread throughout our lifetime that neither one of us would ever imagine when we met back in 1982.
I'm going to guess you probably met his wife after the divorce, which is probably why there was no heat there.
Well, the thing of it is, I was at their wedding. I've known them since they were dating, and their relationship had taken a downward spiral before I became a factor in the equation. But I mean, it's still in the very beginning, made for some awkward moments. Certainly just out of the sheer mechanics of it. But yeah, we go way back. Something about when you get this wrestling DNA and in this fraternity ingrained in you, it truly is for life. And I think when you form the kinds of bonds that he and I did, Dusty and I did, it transcends almost all other life events.
Now, I was there in Iowa, as I said, when you were inducted, and there was a Four Horsemen, I guess, panel that day. And when they were bringing up the accident that you had, I could see the pain in Tully when he was talking about it, and all of those guys. And I recently interviewed Barry Darso, who was in the territory at the time, and he said it was hard on everybody because it could have happened to anybody. Could you just kind of go over what happened with that terrible accident and how you remained so strong and have become such a success afterwards?
Yeah, it was a freak thing, and to your first point, it could have happened to anybody, any of us at any time. I mean, we all lived life in the fast lane. We traveled, we worked 345 days plus a year and traveled in cars and airplanes all the time. I had near misses in what could have been a plane crash. Lots of things happen. And on that particular occasion, frankly, uh, I had a 911 turbo Porsche. It was like my dream car from the time I was a teenager. And the car was extremely fast, extremely nimble, gave you this crazy confidence you could do anything in it. And I was 5 minutes from my house, and I was driving 50 miles an hour, but I was on a wet road. And frankly, on that wet road at that time of night, in the conditions, I should have been driving about 30 miles an hour to have been safe. But at 50, I hit some water right in the middle of a corner that caused the car to hydroplane, lost control of it, broadside a telephone pole. My head hits the roof because I'm so big in this little bitty car. C5 vertebrae explodes. I'm instantaneously paralyzed. Don't lose consciousness, which was a blessing and a curse. Because when they finally got to me, they were getting ready to try to pull me out of the car. I said, I can't move. And which they instantly stopped trying to pull me out of the car, cut the roof off with the jaws of life, got me stabilized, got me out of there, got me to the hospital. And all the experts said, you got 1,000,000 to 1 shot of ever walking again. You've got, just the worst injury an athlete could possibly have, and gave me a really bleak prognosis. But a host of things happened. First of all, I didn't have the good sense to understand what the medical experts were telling me. So I was stubborn. I worked my whole life to build myself into what I had become as an athlete. And so I had a determination there. But I also had a faith inside me, first of all, that God hadn't brought me through all I'd been through just for life as I knew it to be over with at 27 years old. So I purposed myself that I had been allowed to play this superhuman character on TV for all these many, many months and years. And that now I have an outpouring of literally hundreds of thousands of letters coming into this hospital where they had to hire more people to work the telephones to try to answer and questions and things that were coming about. And I said, win, lose, or draw, if I don't ever step foot in a ring again, I refuse to quit and to be yet another statistic for somebody to say, oh, well, he, poor pitiful him. And I wanted to do whatever it took to be the best I was going to be capable of being, to try to be an example for these people that have supported me like nothing I'd ever seen in my life. We had literally had millions of people watching this program, and now I'm getting letters from doctors, from lawyers, professionals, all people, all walks of life, and they genuinely care about Terry Allen. And so now Magnum TA has a choice. I can either become that statistic the doctors have given me this prognosis, or I can dig in and walk the walk that I talked about all these years. And that was my thing. I wanted to find out whatever the watermark was that I was able to get back to which I did walk out of the hospital 5 months later under my own power, and never regained all the physical capabilities that I once had, but ended up being blessed in a whole other set of skills that I didn't even know I had. And, so now, 2020, stepdad to 5 kids, father of 3, managed to support them and take care of them as they've grown up. And, and I'm thankful every day to God that I wake up with another opportunity to do my best every day and show people that, quitting really isn't an option. You've got to persevere, and you've got to have faith. I believe the good Lord had a plan for all of us, and certainly He had one way bigger than me. Than that 6 years that I was in professional wrestling, that was a magic time in my life. Yet it made up this small microcosm that we're still talking about to this day, but it doesn't make up but a very small part of the man that I feel like I've become.
You continued on in the wrestling business a little bit after, and then I guess you went into other domains. What made you get out of the wrestling business?
It was a very weird place to be at 28, to be someone who should still be a performer and still be, in the ring, utilizing those skills that I had worked on so hard, where I had all the head knowledge because of the years of listening to Eddie and listening to Bill Watts and watching how productions, take place, and learning psychology from Dusty. I had avenues and things that I could have added and been a contributor, and that was my intent. But because an evolution had taken place between 86 and 88, where the players now were not just the performers like I had been. They were guys with huge salaries, and by lieu of having that huge salary, really didn't feel like a guy like me had anything that I could tell them, that I could offer them, and give them advice about things. And when I realized that after a couple of years of doing that, that I wasn't going to be able to make a difference, and I wasn't going to be able to do anything to really improve that product, it 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 was time for me to look for other avenues and something different, because it wasn't satisfying to me to just be there to get a paycheck. If I couldn't feel like I was contributing and doing something to really make it a better product, it wasn't satisfying.
And the last guy I'll ask you about today is Nikita Koloff, who you were working with, I believe, at the time of that accident.
Yeah, and I had just finished the program with Nikita, and we're very good friends to this day, and have um, do done multiple appearances together and signings and events and whatnot. And he's full time in the ministry work, and we're very close, very 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 close to this day. The guy that I was actually in the program with during that period of time was Jimmy Garvin. I had my very last match with Jimmy Garvin in Greenville, South Carolina, that night in a lumberjack match. And him and his wife Patty had just come to the territory a couple months before, and I was in this like intermediary type uh, program with Jimmy. Didn't really know where that program was going, because the next step for me was to go back and get the world title from Ric Flair. But Jimmy and I are still very close friends and have been for years, and got some great memories with them too.
Do you have any social media where fans could look you up and get messages to you?
Yeah, I've got a Facebook, and of course, that taps out. Can't go so far with that. And I've got a Twitter. Um, what else do I have? Instagram. Instagram's probably the best place, because Instagram's an unlimited thing. You can search me out on Instagram. It's under Magnum _TA, I think, something like that. But yeah, you can message me on Instagram, and I've got a Cameo account too that I do shout outs and answer questions or send messages to people. But as far as communicating, I keep up with the Instagram probably better than I do anything.
I know you were babyface most of your career, but finally, do you have any advice for heels out there? Because I know I used to be a heel, and I know we got a lot of heel wrestlers that watch this channel.
Well, I never actually got to work as a heel, believe it or not, and but I was a real rough babyface, and it wasn't the traditional, babyface as far as what I did in and out of the ring as far as my persona. But the thing of it is what Eddie used to tell me was kind of simple. If a heel can out wrestle a babyface, or if a heel can out fight a babyface in a straight toe to toe contest, then there's really no reason for him to be a heel, unless you just don't like his personality, right? But the classic heel babyface reaction is supposed to be a babyface that frustrates the heel into taking a shortcut to get the advantage, and not to be blatant about things that bury the referee in getting your heat, or doing things that try to make you in a babyface line. A true heel is not an admirable character, and it is a role. It's a great role. And you can't have a good baby face without a good heel. They make each other. It's the dance. But when I was when I was a baby face, the biggest part of being a baby face is not shining, it's selling. Because when you sell is when you get the people to want to make the comeback, and they want to see you win that title that's right beyond your grasp. So the heel's got to be sneaky. He's got to be devious. He's got to be willing to be cowardly. He's got to be all these things that, if it's not wrapped up in your DNA to do that, sometimes it's tough. And I think that's why we've got these, like, all these shades of gray today. People say, oh, well, that's just old school. You don't need to have heels and baby faces. Well, I guess what? To sell a ticket, to make somebody want to see somebody else stomp a mud hole in somebody else, you got to hate one of them and love the other one. And there's no easy way to do that unless you have heels and baby faces.
Hannibal, you hear me? This is the captain, okay? Magnum's talking about sneaky and devious people, and it gets no sneakier and more devious than you. You are taking way too much of my client Magnum TA's time, and if this is the last time I see you, it's still going to be too soon. Your time is up, Daddy. That's it.